Today's episode is with Brandon Reece. Brandon is the CEO of Floodlight Consulting Group, specializing in helping water damage restoration companies grow their business and increase their profits. He's also the co-host of the Head, Heart, and Boots podcast, a popular show in the home service industry. As a former Army NCO and paratrooper who has really found his niche in the civilian world, Brandon covers a lot of tactical advice around translating military skills to the civilian world, finding purpose after leaving the service, the damage restoration industry as a great option for veterans, and a whole lot more. The only thing debatably better than our conversation today is Brandon's world-class mustache. With that, let's jump into it. Most people you talk to when transitioning out of the military have never actually transitioned out themselves. You're probably getting a bunch of opinions from people who plan on staying in until retirement and have no idea how to actually show empathy for your situation. This podcast is about providing fresh perspectives and a front row seat for conversations with successful veterans doing big things after leaving the military. Jack and I are still in the nascent stages of figuring out what facial hair works for us. So we're just like trying to catch up here. Jack, you should see Brandon's partner as well. They've got the amazing duo of facial hair.
Yeah, he's the full meal deal. So he's got he's got the silver laced in there and all the things. So yeah,
Nice.
it was funny.
I mean,
We started this journey. I don't know how. I don't know. It's been maybe a couple years or something that we've had the mustaches and all the things. And then my wife, like almost right out of the gate, immediately turned it into our branding. And so now I think we're just ultimately kind of stuck. I'm not even sure that I could shave it if I wanted to. So now I don't know. I don't know what to do. I guess we're just kind of leaning in. So
It's like Brandon Turner from previous Bigger Pockets guy. He's like Beardy Brandon, so he can never shave his beard.
yeah, so now you're stuck. Like, how do you not be that now?
Yeah, Jack, if you Google Head, Heart, and Boots podcast, Brandon and his partner have a great podcast for the kind of blue collar industry. And on the logo for the podcast is their faces with the facial hair. So they're really well branded, known in the industry for it, but also stuck with it indefinitely.
There's nothing we can do about it.
I might be keeping this because I keep getting compliments, and men just don't get complimented ever on things, but that's something that you get compliments on. And I was like, yeah, maybe I'll keep this. I like it. I like the attention.
Me too, man. I wouldn't normally lead with this, but since you opened the gate, it is a daily thing that somebody says, nice mustache. Of course, we might get out of the pocket of time, and then people are like, dude, you're a tool. But right now, I'm soaking it all in, man. I get a few a day, and I'm like, yeah, that's right. It's good for my ego. Be pumped up.
Right.
Well,
Well, it's funny. I'm in Hawaii, and I had just visited home to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and everybody has a beard in Milwaukee. It's the beer culture. It's just everybody's got a beard. And I was gonna buy some beard oil, and I went to just Target, and there was an entire aisle devoted to facial hair. And I came back to Hawaii, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna go figure some stuff out. And I went to the Target aisle where there should be, and there's definitely stuff to shave. There's nothing for beards. It's just not a thing here. No, like people don't have beards here. I guess on Amazon it is for the beard oil.
That's right. What island are you on?
We're on Oahu. Yeah,
Okay.
right outside of Honolulu. So
Yeah, right on. Cool.
yeah.
Well, Brandon, we're looking forward to this, man. We'll jump in here soon. Again, the premise of this whole thing is we think there's a bunch of amazing people outside of, they come from a military background, have some military experience, but have jumped into the business world and have some great lessons learned from either their transition or the work that they're currently doing that might open the eyes of people transitioning to possibilities out there. And as you and I talked about previously, I think that blue collar industry, and particularly restoration, is a fantastic potential field for veterans to go into and to look at. And they probably maybe haven't even heard of it. So yeah, looking forward to your insights there. And yeah. And anything else, Jack, before we?
No, I appreciate you coming on. I think we're doing this because we're also recently transitioned, and I think we're trying to provide one more piece of communication for people who are thinking of transitioning, and hopefully we can provide some different value than what the military is providing on its own. So I appreciate the different walks of life we're having on this podcast. We're trying to give people just a lot of different ideas that they can take and run with, and hopefully enable their transition period for them.
Love it. Yeah, that's super cool. I'm happy to do it. This should be a fun combo.
Awesome. Well, Brandon, thanks for coming on, man. This is something we've looked forward to for a while. I'd love to we just start off with a little bit about your background. We'll go into a more detailed intro, but how'd you get to where you are now, and what'd you do in the military and kind of that path along the way?
Yeah, yeah. So military time, I was 11 Bravo. I was in the Army. You guys both Army? I know you are, but
Yep.
if you both, yeah. So 82nd Airborne Division, I went there right out of basically out of high school. I had it in my mind I was going to go be a smoke jumper. And so, well, what do you do to prep for being a smoke jumper? Well, you go to airborne school and you go to the 82nd. So did that for a while. I actually went in 96 and then I separated from military in 2005. And I actually ended up transferring out and then went to the National Guard. And of course, that's when I get called up to go to Iraq in '03 is with one of the 162, like a National Guard leg unit. It was kind of like, well, I didn't anticipate that, but that's ultimately what ended up happening. And then post-military career, probably like a lot of guys, that it's hard to translate an 11 Bravo experience package into how do you go get hired by the next corporate company to and make your way to the top. So I went through several years of just kind of trying to make my way in the construction environment and that kind of stuff. And then eventually landed in what we all know as the disaster restoration industry. And so I've spent now the last almost 15 years being in that space. Had the honor and the opportunity to build a few companies in that space, and now my business partner and I run a consulting agency that just focuses predominantly on restoration companies and then just contracting businesses, trade businesses in general.
Can you go into just briefly more specifics on the disaster restoration industry? Because when I was getting out of the military, I certainly didn't know what that meant specifically. So would love to hear kind of your take, given decade and a half of experience there.
Yeah, yeah. It was, I mean, it's like, I think most people, if you ask them, like, how did you get into the industry? It's 9 out of 10. Well, I knew somebody that exposed me to it for the first time, and then they kind of get hooked.
I've
What's
learned that
that?
people I've learned that people either were born into it or they fell into it. Nobody like deliberately chose.
Yeah, I feel like that's kind of a mission that I'm on subconsciously now is just like raise awareness because there's so
Yeah.
much really cool opportunity. I think you and I plan to talk about that a little bit, but the disaster restoration industry is essentially it's contracting, but it's just focused very specifically to help folks once damage, whether it be from nature or some kind of unplanned event, damages your home or business. And so contractors in the disaster restoration have found specialized ways to clean and dry those structures, prepare them for construction, and then ultimately put them back into their pre-loss condition. So for all intents and purposes, it's a bit of a superhero industry, actually. And it's one of the things I love about it. I mean, it obviously has its downsides like everything, but yeah.
I think we will definitely go into more detail in a little bit later in this podcast, but I just want to highlight, I mean, it's such a great industry with the ability to interact with people, to show up in some of their darkest days and a lot of times and have a massive impact on their life and getting them back to that pre-loss condition or back to their normal kind of daily life amidst such a crazy interruption. So I think there's all kinds of value for people to find there and purpose as well. But I'd love to start off. So could you go into a little more details about leaving the military and then getting into construction, kind of meandering your way to falling into disaster restoration?
Yeah, I wish it was like some super cool story, but the reality is I just didn't know what I was doing or what I wanted. When I first separated the military, for me, my personal why was we just started to have kids and world deployments, and the cadence of that was just in that particular point in time, it was probably going to be anywhere between 6 to 18 months, and you were going to go somewhere again. And I was gone because like early in that deployment, they really didn't have a good grip on timeframes. Like now there's a pretty good limited time frame that people are being deployed for. Normally they try to keep it under that 6 month mark. Well, I was gone for 18 months. And so to have little kids at that time, it was super negative. And it was just one of those things where at the time, my priorities, I just decided, my wife and I decided I was going to separate from the military. But man, it was tough because I had spent nearly 8 years being in these kind of, I don't know, high stress, kind of adrenaline type environments. There's something special when you're on a bird with 120 guys getting ready to throw yourself out of an airplane. It's hard to find that in the civilian working sector. And so I really struggled in terms of the lack of camaraderie, Most companies that I would go and work with, it was every man or woman for himself. There wasn't like this, your backs are to each other and you're looking to get in a fight with the enemy and not each other. And so it was hard for me to wrap my head around that. And yeah, I'm not going to lie about it. It was tough. Like I had a tough time coming back to the work environment and really being excited about what I was seeing and being exposed to. And so for the next several years, I did things like stack steel for telecom companies and all these kinds of things where you're still at heights, you're still doing some cool stuff that felt a little out of the ordinary, a little dangerous. But then when I did find the restoration business, there was like in the early days, we kind of were just figuring everything out. You were deploying onto these losses. You were middle of the night. You were getting phone calls at 2 a.m. to go respond to a big fire or whatever. And it felt like it did. There was like these pieces of it that reminded me of the military space that I really loved. And so we leaned into that, and ultimately it's what sunk its claws in me and didn't let me leave. It's why I ended up falling in love ultimately with the industry.
While you were finding this, did you feel like there was a lack of camaraderie in those times? And was that an impetus for the change? Or did you just kind of happen upon that and realize that this industry had more of that camaraderie feeling?
Yeah, I didn't know. I was like, you're either born into it or you fall into it, right? As Griffin said. So I didn't. I had no exposure to, didn't understand the industry even existed. And so I didn't really learn some of the kind of core elements of it until I got exposed to it. But ultimately, man, I always kind of wrestled with this. I knew I could do more, be more, but it didn't feel as if I was experiencing those things in those series of careers or jobs that I had when I first left the military. And here's the reality of it, man. 99% of that was my own problem. It was in my own head. I was making adjustments, trying to figure things out, but I just wasn't happy. And it was like either the challenge of it wasn't very challenging. And so I would get a bit bored once I spent any time on the ground in a particular job or industry. And so until I kind of meandered my way into the disaster response industry, I really just wasn't having that good of a damn time. Then I got into this, and it kind of brought out a whole new level of grind, and it was super fun, and it caught my curiosity, and I never left.
What's different about what you're doing now? What is it that sunk its teeth or claws into you? And is there anything that you deliberately do to kind of cultivate that sense of purpose or that camaraderie in what you're doing now?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So one of the things I feel like I always leaned into, pretty natural wiring, is even in the chain of command in the military, obviously it's very black and white, right? It's very intentional, very systematic. There's not a lot of negotiating who does what and why you do it. But I always found a way to lean into relationship with my guys. And it just created a space that even as an NCO leading teams, those we just had a special bond. There's the bond that comes from danger. There's just something special, as my wife says, with guys and in bonding in danger. But then on top of that too, I'm just a relational leader. Like I do believe in investing time and energy into people and reaping the kind of really interesting mutual experience that you can create with your downlines when you kind of trust each other and you're actually looking out for one another. And so I lean into that naturally. So when I had first separated from the military, kind of trying to find that home base, part of that is where I fell in the chain of command. I didn't either feel like I had enough influence to lean into that and provide that kind of culture or whatever the case may be. So, anyways, long and short of it, when I first got into the industry, I had the opportunity. Mainly, I was just lucky in the first business that I got exposed to. I was able to have a lot of freedom to take control of what we were doing and designing the processes and the systems and the way that we interacted and worked with each other. And so I was able to lean hard into that kind of natural wiring I have of building camaraderie and doing hard stuff at a high level, at a high pace, but somehow remaining motivated in the grind. It's embracing the suck, so to speak. So it's partly cultivated, and I think the industry creates the opportunity. I mean, it's a 24/7 gig, emergency response. People have a need. They're not waiting for multiple days for you to arrive and come prepared with a plan to begin problem solving and establish a way for them to get out of this kind of dangerous or less than optimal system. And so the ground was pretty fertile for me to lean into that kind of excitement and continue to build it in the teams that I was responsible for.
Well, at risk of this sounding a little bit too cliche, I was just astounded when I first was on site at one of our restoration companies. I get there, I see their bay, which looks exactly like a motor pool. They've got a load plan on every vehicle. And I was like, this is odd. I look over to the side, I see what looks like a squad of guys doing some light calisthenics in the morning before they go take on their daily jobs. And I'm like, PT? And we've got a production manager leading these things like a squad leader. And I'm just like, did I just step right back into the middle? I mean, it was bizarre how similar things were. And then not to mention the fact that each one of these crews or these technicians, they're hopping in their vehicle, they're driving to the job site, and they're engaging with the homeowner, like a key leader engagement, KLE, and solving a problem. I mean, it was just like I was mind blown at how similar it was and how much a squad leader or platoon sergeant or platoon leader from the military or team leader would absolutely crush that sort of job given their experience, their familiarity and comfortability with high pressure situations. I mean, you're walking into a homeowner who's just probably been devastated or a natural catastrophic event and providing calm to that chaotic time. And so I was just like, man, this is more guys need to hear about this.
Yeah. Well, and what's really interesting about that particular experience that you had, that I wish that was the norm, right? That's the opportunity, right? I think you highlighted clearly, especially based on your trade craft now, like you found a company that was operating at an elite level. They're leveraging the kinds of things that the military has learned how to leverage in their favor to respond quickly, take control quickly, right? Begin communicating with a diverse group of people with a diverse set of needs. That the beauty of our business is you can lean hard into that kind of cadence of activity and prioritization, and it will yield really big results. It's part of what we do as a consulting firm is we're trying to teach some of the businesses out there to lean into these kind of factors because they are so successful and they do mirror what the military has done for decades to leverage in their favor, do unbelievable things under very diverse and stressful circumstances. So yeah, it's an awesome explanation. And we're probably looking at a fairly elite operating company too. So that's cool.
Yeah, I was spoiled for sure right off the bat.
Yeah. Yeah, that's super cool.
Did it end up being what you thought when you were transitioning?
I think again, I didn't have a good context for what to expect. So I think I was just kind of embracing the opportunity as it came at me. I think really, if I'm honest about it, a lot of my experience and the motivation that I maintained had a lot to do with the autonomy, the freedom, and the exposure that the business owner gave me when they first brought me onto their team and brought me into the industry. I think one of the things that is very common in our industry is the type of entrepreneurs that get engaged in the business. There's a lot of opportunities for young men and women separating the military and joining companies like this because there's no ceilings. These are often entrepreneurs that are action first oriented. They don't necessarily know systems and processes. A lot of times they're not naturally wired to lean hard into that. They're just like, hey, let's help people. Let's take action. Let's get out there and do something. And so the opportunity for men and women to come in and just give a shit, right? Gas and adapt and overcome and lean into all those things that they learned in the military. Of sometimes you just got to go with the flow. It's like best laid plans of mice and men. Everything's great until the first bullet's fired, right? And so that mentality, it just wins in our industry. Instead of us all getting wrapped around the axle of how it could be, should it be, and would be, military men and women, they come in, they just get it. Like they come in, they transition well into the industry, they can take advantage of the opportunities, and they're not afraid to adapt and overcome. And so ultimately, they just often keep getting rewarded with more opportunity and more opportunity. That's what happened to me. And so again, a lot of that is a testament to the owner that exposed me to the industry the first time. But again, it was like I just leaned into all those military elements and they just work here. And so I succeeded and I climbed through the ranks. And of course, that becomes addictive, right? When you win more, when you start to learn ways to win, you lean into those harder and you get more. So it just became kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, I think, to a certain extent. I'd love to say that it was all me and it was all intentional. It was all super proactive. I think there was definitely elements of that for certain, but a lot of it, man, it works, right? If you just bring the same mentality to the job in this industry, you're gonna get rewarded for it. And if the company that you first set your foot into isn't rewarding you for it, there's a million right around the corner waiting to reward you for it.
Is there anything that you would recommend somebody who's maybe a year out from transitioning, who this idea does pique their interest? What can they do now for the next year to establish a little bit of expertise or to help with that transition into a position like that?
That's a really good question. Okay, so the industry, and Griffin, you probably see a lot of this in your role now, that the industry is changing a bit in terms of who the most valuable players are in the roster. And not long ago, it was very common for, and they still are to a certain extent, but not long ago, estimators were like they reigned supreme. They normally filled some kind of sales role in conjunction with writing scopes, writing sheets. And so they normally got paid the most. They had nice commission structures, and they still do. Like this is still common. But what we're seeing is more and more AI and other tools are being introduced to our industry, is that the ability to create an estimate to a certain extent is a dying trade. Like it's not going to be long where really artificial intelligence is doing most of the heavy lifting. And so what we're seeing is an increasingly high emphasis on the value of project managers, especially not just in the EMS side or the emergency response side, meaning like the people that go out and dry things, do controlled demo, but it's the construction side as well. As project managers tend to be the most influential relationship in terms of how your brand is perceived and experienced by the client. And so if I knew now what I was doing and thinking about, I would have begun investing some time and energy into certifications, licensing, and training around project management. And the reality of it is, if you're E5, if you're team leader and up, you're probably already being exposed to a lot of best practices that are very relevant, right? Like even in an infantry platoon, things like taking inventory on $1 million pieces of equipment, that like there's something there that you're learning, right? Like the fact that at every formation, I'm taking account of all the primary pieces of equipment for security reasons. You leave a set of night vision somewhere, that's a real legitimate problem on a lot of different levels, right? So all those things where you're proactively counting, paying attention, tracking, monitoring, reporting, like all of that translates. So, anyways, long story short, I think anything related to project management, customer service, communication, foundational leadership, again, this is all stuff we get tons of exposure to in the military. All of it's helpful for sure. And I think what's interesting, Griffin, do you know, is that program, are they still using that program or leveraging the program where 6 months out from separation, you can go get a job in kind of like an equivalent kind of, I guess, level of responsibility role and do that for the last 6 months of your contract?
Yeah, as long as you get chain of command approval, you can do
Okay.
up to 6 months of a skill bridge or career skills program
Yeah.
to get great and valuable experience out in the industry. And that's in fact one thing that we stress on nearly every episode is please try and do that. See if you can get approval any way possible to do that, because that's such an invaluable way of making that off ramp from the military a little more smooth.
It's amazing. So as an employer, we leveraged that. So I hired a couple project managers through a program like that. One guy was a CB, a pretty good fit, right? So he
Yeah.
he spent the majority of his military career building stuff and being a project manager. Well, lo and behold, the military paid me to hire him for 6 months. We got to learn how to date each other, and it was rad. Like I would leverage that any day of the week if you've got access to it. What an awesome opportunity.
Well, to your point, Brandon, a lot of guys or people in general think that program is only available to work in certain companies. Maybe like Fortune 500 companies are the ones that advertise it the most. But in fact, not 100% of the time. So you have to be able to get the right approval and go through the right program. But you can work for any company as part of a skill bridge program. So you could work for a small independent restoration company in X state. You could do nearly any job. And so the world is yours to find. It's a golden ticket. I did it myself when I was getting out of the Army. It's a golden ticket to essentially, like you said, the Army is paying that employer to give you a great employee and someone that they can likely hire on the back end.
And here's something too for guys or men, women listening to this is depending on what your MOS was, a lot of us make decisions at the beginning of our military career, not based on the same set of lenses that we're making decisions 4, 6, 8, 10 years later. And so for me, it was all about gung ho. It was smoke jumper. I wanted to jump out of airplanes. Well, looking back now, I could think of a couple other MOSs I probably could have moved into, right, to set myself up. But the reality of it is that sometimes you're asking people to bet on you purely for the sake that you were halfway successful in the military. Well, an employer that's really keyed in on their P&L, that's a harder decision to make. But as soon as the government says, hey, we're willing to foot the bill for this person while you decide whether or not you like them, well, then all of a sudden it's easier for me to sit down and just have an honest conversation. And I literally did this. Like, I didn't transition out like this, but I used it literally same thing. I need you to take a bet on me. Like, I'm going to give you everything that I'm saying, but I need you to give me a chance, because my resume did not scream CEO of a disaster restoration. You know what I mean? It was like, yeah, you've got some experience. It's eclectic at best. And you spend a bunch of time learning how to fire shit. Like, that's not, so this is an awesome opportunity for employers to be much more willing to take a chance. And a lot of times as an exiting military person, you need somebody to take a chance on you so you can start building the resume that makes sense in the civilian sector. So I think it's kind of a no-brainer as long as you take the time and commit to trying to figure out how to leverage it in your favor.
Brandon, you mentioned that your resume doesn't necessarily scream restoration COO. If you were speaking to someone transitioning that they maybe they were 11 Bravo or some combat arms MOS, how can they translate their skills into something that would speak to a restoration owner? I mean, we've hit on a bunch of things, but maybe if you could succinctly summarize a couple of the key ones that a restoration owner would be like, okay, yeah, they actually sound like much more of a fit than I would think at first glance.
It's funny because had you asked me that even 3 or 4 years ago, I still may struggle to answer it. So as a consulting firm now, where we really had to shift all our focus into teaching, training, communication, system process development, it made me realize actually how good of a job the military did do at training the fundamentals of leadership and like operational efficiency in me. And it's like when I started to try to begin synthesizing my thought processes in the kind of leadership that I deployed to create success in teams, well, then all of a sudden I'm like, well, it's because of XYZ, points back to the military. Well, it's because of this posture, military. It's because of this leadership designation, military. Well, it's because you got to break up a 1-in-10 ratio. You can't do more than 1-in-10. Like everything pointed back to the military. And so, and that's only, dude, I left as an E6. I was no command sergeant major. I was not. So I think what I would suggest is that most people just stop for a second. Separate yourself from the tool that was in your hand that you used to do the job, and think about all the auxiliary elements that you had to put into place to be successful in your job in the military. Understanding organizational structure, systemizing communication, establishing SOPs, systems, processes for efficiency, right? Removing the complexity of operations. I mean, think about what teams in the military, especially combat arms, do on your standard operation. Step out of it for a moment and start writing a list of all the things that required for you to be successful in that moment. Guys, I can't tell you how many times I leverage and teach how to do an after action review. Like in the military, like you didn't take a bathroom break, it felt like, without doing it. I was going to use much more colorful language, but I don't know where your guys' stance on that is. But you did an AAR for everything. You want to know what one of the most fundamentally success creating tools in a business is? Do an AAR. There's the secret, right? So I think the reality of it is that it's a head game we play with ourselves, that we haven't learned anything because we used an MAR, whatever, military weapon grade. Okay. Whatever that thing was, you're shooting rockets and throwing bullets, you're still learning some really fundamentally important things. So again, leadership fundamentals, organizational structure, you name it, you're probably doing it. You just got to step back for a moment and stop looking at things from the lens of what your uniform is telling you, and to just ask yourself fundamentally, what practices, what behaviors am I leveraging every day? And it's stuff that businesses are desperate for, literally desperate for. I mean, the owners of most companies don't have the fundamentals that you do, literally. The only thing they've done a great job is take action. They're entrepreneurs, right? But you can bring in the power tools to take an entrepreneur's dream and turn it into an effective, scalable system, because you're used to operating with standard operating procedures. There's a ton of stuff we do, right?
I think even more simply, the military just teaches you how to show up on time and do what you said you were going to do. And that is lost on people a lot of times. Not everybody does that. Not every employee even understands that baseline, requirement. But as a business owner, if that's all you do, I'm not trying to oversimplify it, but that's 90% of it. If you just show up and you do what you say you're going to do, the customer's going to be happy. And that's a lot of times just the way to get to a 5-star review is just by doing those simple things.
So
And the work has to happen, of course, but the expertise comes, it builds. And if you do show up on time, then you're not a problem. And if you're not a problem, then they're going to probably focus more effort on you to help create that expertise and make you better.
Here's another thing that I think we overlook a lot. If you think about the training windows for most people in the military in terms of what they're expected to accomplish and learn, it's pretty bonkers, right? Like they rebuild you in 3 months, essentially, when you go to basic training, right? From there, you might go to some kind of advanced school. You get to your units, you guys get exposed to all sorts of training. Griffin, you're ex-Ranger, right? Like, how many times were we in a week learning some complex system or process? And by the end of it, you have to be fundamentally sound. Like you may have to be in a position where you're so fundamentally sound, you're going to now take people out and be responsible for them in that thing. What an amazing power tool to bring with you to a company, right? I think the connections are endless. I just think, again, we don't do a good job of stepping back and just taking stock of the things that we've had to do to accomplish or have any level of success in the military. And I just think all of it's just fundamental in the civilian sector.
You hit on the need to accelerate the learning curve within the military, and it's just kind of like expected and required of every position and every new assignment. Have there been ways that you've done that in the civilian world or in your current job, that you've taken something and learned it or accelerated the learning curve in a way that others may not, or that you've drawn from your military experience to do so?
Yeah, for sure, man. I've made jokes most of my career that it's like, if I don't know it, that's fine. I'll figure it out. Because the military taught me that. It's not even that I'm so much better at it than anybody else. You just get exposed to it enough that you grow confident in it. Like you just know, hey, they're going to throw something at me. Yesterday, I didn't know shit about it. And at the end of today, I'm going to be able to talk to you about it with some sense of purpose and understanding. And so that confidence was really powerful. But the principle of how we learn in the military, right? Like kind of at the end of the day, you could almost boil it down to these three kind of fundamental processes. And it's watch me, I'm going to tell you what I'm doing, right? You do it, I'm going to walk you through it. And then the third one is you do it, I'm going to coach you up. Right? Like fundamentally, that's how we learned in the military. And I think what we fail to do in most businesses, especially in our industry, is that we call everything on the job training. Well, on the job training, if it mirrors what the military did, that's fine. But that's not what we do. We hope that people learn through like symbiosis or something by sitting in the passenger seat of one of my guys who may or may not really actually give a shit about my business. And then somehow that guy who's never actually been accountable to do the job well is going to somehow tell my new guy how to do the job really well. It's a disaster waiting to happen, and we all do it over and over, right? So I think the opportunity is create a pattern of how to teach your people how to do things and follow that pattern of watch me, I'll tell you what I'm doing. You do it, I'll walk you through it, and then you do it and I'll coach you up. Right? If we do that, people can learn amazing things. Like we push back that techs should be able to be a tech 1 in about 45 days. If you're intentional about training them, meaning you tell them how to do it, you give them a chance to practice it, and then you pay attention, you inspect what you expect, and you keep coaching up their competency until they're operating at an elite and independent level. If you're intentional about it, we all can learn. If you're from the military, you're going to do that even without the formal guidance in most cases, right?
And something to add to that is as the subordinate or as the new military person coming into an organization, if they're not doing that, maybe don't demand it, but communicate that with them. And maybe then you'll get even better training from the people who you're trying to learn from. And if they're not understanding it, then you can communicate what you learned from the military and apply that to their business, even if they're not already doing it.
100%, dude. That's some extreme ownership stuff right there, right? That's a perfect example of it in play, man. Love it.
And that's how people change cultures too, just by demanding excellence and also exuding that same standard.
Yeah. We have a guy in our team, Wayne Hudson. He's technically, we call him our business manager, but he's much more than that. He's one of those guys that's gotten very skilled at leading up the org chart our military would say leading up the chain of command, right? If we're Jocko fans. And the way that he's done that is that he is confident in the things that he's done, deployed, or experienced that have helped him be much more successful than the average bear. And so when he comes to a team like ours, even though we have really great competency and skill sets in our leadership, he sees things that aren't being effectively deployed yet. And he has no problem through trust and professionalism communicating in such a way where we get exposed to an idea and then we're able to leverage it in our favor inside our industry. And Chris and I have done that to a certain extent in all the businesses we've been exposed to. So I think there's a lot of that is really sound. And I think to a certain extent, it gives military folks a way to show their value at a higher level than just the task or the role that they've been hired for. I mean, if you got to be careful, egos come to play. It's hard to tell somebody their baby's ugly. But if you come in and you build trust by doing what you say, right? Following through on your actions and your commitments, and you say, hey, something that I learned in the military that helped me be really effective was X, Y, and Z. I wonder if that would work in this kind of environment, right? And then all of a sudden it's that business owner gets to think on that, chew on that. And now when they think about you and your name and your role in the organization, they're not limited to, yeah, they're good at that job. They're thinking about you at a much higher level. So that whole opportunity to lead up the chain of command is profound. I did a lot of that. And within a couple years, I was running the bulk of a restoration company I'd been in the industry like 2.5 years at the time. So it wasn't time and grade that gave me there. It was because I was good at leading up the chain of command and I did what I said I was going to do. Right. So, yeah, I think with my military days, I think the F word was used more than any other pause or descriptor in the entire human language. We've obviously subdued it since then, but it's hard to fight old habits, I guess.
Yeah, maybe there's like a widget within the AI, like large language model that will cut out, have the military filter on it where it just cuts out.
I have something that maybe your timing with transitioning out of the military was different timing wise as to where we are globally. Not to say that there's not anything going on, because that's for sure. But you mentioned one of the reasons that you got out is just the deployment. 18 months away from the family was insane. And as a family, that probably was pretty impactful to you. A lot of people nowadays, I think, are more concentrated on the financial piece of it. So with leaving the military and leaving that amazing check that you're going to get every single month and transitioning into something new, whether that be entrepreneurship or another job that you think you're going to get into, but the financial piece seems to be a very big focus for people. Did you experience that it was easier to make ends meet once you transitioned out, or would you just make sure people are aware that it's actually harder than what it seems when you're transitioning out? You think you're going to make all this money. Could you speak to that piece as far as the financial, not necessarily you specifically, but how did the financial piece look like when you transitioned out?
Well, I would say this. I think mentally that's where the biggest fight is. And I think you have to be prepared that for a while, people don't necessarily attribute a ton of skill set competency to you, even though you've been doing something, let's say 4, 5, 6, 10 years, depending on how long you were in the military when you separate. And I think you have to just get on the other side of that. Hey, people are going to look at your resume and you may have more of a challenge getting a door to open, even though everyone's desperate to find good people right now. Like my kids are in the same experience where I have good kids. They're very capable and competent, and they've struggled to get the door open to talk to good companies about positions that they're all desperate to fill. We won't go into that. I think a lot of that has to do with we let our recruiting be driven by AI and things like recruiting sites versus people and competent hunters. But my point is that was the biggest adjustment for me, is that I wasn't going to just walk out and necessarily get the exact same pay I was having in the military. There is an element that to a certain extent you have to reprove yourself. And I think what's hard for a lot of military people is to get over that. Their ego fights it, which is understandable. Here you have at 18 years old, you could be responsible for multiple humans in very dangerous environments. And you're now going to go work for some Yahoo that at best had an experience where the line was long at Starbucks. Like, I get it. That's hard to deal with mentally. But the only person that will suffer if you get stuck in that game is you. And so there's a matter of what I would scream out to everybody is put your ego down. Don't lose grasp of all those things that you know in your guts that make you valuable, competent, and stand out in a crowd, and just bring the kit with you. Get your ass through an open door and then go to work proving yourself, because you will move through the ranks so damn quickly that we're not talking years of invested energy. A lot of times movements, especially in our industry, can happen in the matter of months. And so I would say the earning potential, especially in our industry, massive. You can dwarf anything you ever made in a federal paycheck. However, mentally, you need to be prepared that you may spend part of a year being the bottom person on the totem pole. It's all right. Take the challenge, man. That's the mud pit. Come to work, show up, put your time in. You will start passing people in the ranks so fast, it'll be stupid. And then you're going to make plenty of money. People that do what they say at a high level make money, period.
That's absolutely right. I've seen it firsthand. People come in as a tech, show their competence right away, especially if you're coming from the military or some other place, probably taking a pay cut, but people are just desperate for good leaders. And that you're saying people that show up in the right place, right time, right uniform, and are not afraid to take action and have integrity. And before you know it, you'll be a project manager, like you mentioned, or there's so many smaller companies out there looking for a great operator as well. And to your point, the earning potential there is incredible. And it's a little selfish plug here. When you transitioning service members take on a role with a restoration company, or you start one of your own, reach out to me because we're happy to talk. But I see it all the time. These guys come in as a COO and just the company explodes, and they've got a ownership piece, and they look at acquisition or some sort of partnership down the road. I mean, that's life-changing money right there that guys can make in just a few short years as an integral part of a company.
It really is. I think one of the biggest things that helped me specifically is just the military's ability to expose you to stuff. And it's just think about all the fundamental experiences that you had in young age in most cases in terms of responsibility. Man, the amount of dollars that one fire team has under their guise of responsibility dwarfs a lot of P&Ls, right? Like your average home business, small business doesn't even have in their inventory anything remotely as expensive and complex as the gear that we had in our rucksacks half the time. And so I think there's just this level of awesome just kind of waiting to get exposed in these businesses or in your own damn business, right? I mean, some of us are entrepreneurs on the call and have leaned into that. But yeah, I think just in general, I think what happens so much, and I know I'm kind of hammering on this, is it's a confidence thing. You guys, military people, have had the honor and the opportunity to do heavy things, expensive, dangerous, right, heavily responsible things. And it's like just waiting to get out and be exposed to your next opportunity. Man, if you bring it with you and you show folks what you're capable of, there's literally no stopping you. And it doesn't matter. You don't have to come to our industry. I'm biased too. But I think anything in the trades, like there's just some profound things happening right now in construction and trade businesses where all the big millionaires now, you think Tommy Mellows and some of these world like contending influencers, bro, A1 garage doors. Like they're not building skyscrapers. They're installing garage doors. Guy runs a $200+ million a year business, and the world looks to him for guidance on how to be a contractor. Like we could do that. Like ex-military people can do that. They've done harder shit. They just don't realize it because they don't have context yet.
Absolutely. I love I'm not sure if you've seen the South Park episode where the handyman is in highest demand. He's the one at Home Depot, and you've got all these PhDs and guys outside picketing looking for handymen that can fix their doorknob. But that's truth, man.
Yeah, that's right. I love it.
Well, Brandon, one question, kind of two-part question that we ask every guest as we start to wrap up is one ask and one give. And so we'll start off with one ask. What's one thing that folks listening to this could do to help you or provide value to you?
Oh, wow. That's a cool request. Well, I'd say that if you're in the military and you're getting ready to kind of like transition out and make your way into the civilian sector, here's my ask. Take a solid couple hours and separate yourself from everything else, people, opinions, influence, social media. Sit down somewhere and literally look down on yourself and pull yourself up to 30,000 feet and take inventory. What have I accomplished in the years or the time frame that I've been in the military? And start documenting, just like you would a food plan. Like, what did I eat today? Go through and take inventory on what you've accomplished, what you've been exposed to, what kinds of responsibilities you've had, and go as far as trying to articulate dollar values. Like, think about, again, we made the rucksack, Floyd. Think about the gear that you individually have on your person on a common basis. What if you're part of a mech unit, or right, or armored units? Like, there's so much stuff. Put dollars and cents to it. Write it out. Create a story arc for yourself where you get to recognize all the things you've been doing that you've grown so accustomed to, you're blind to it now. And just reinvigorate yourself and build your confidence around, holy shit, man, I've done some really cool stuff over the last 3, 4, whatever years. And then when you go out and begin reaching across the desk to introduce yourself to folks, put your ego away. Understand you're going to pull out that kit that you've just spent that weekend building yourself up on. And that's where your self-confidence should come from, not from the initial job title that you get when you transition out. Your confidence comes from what you know is what you've experienced firsthand. Put that in your bag, walk into the next opportunity, humble yourself, remain curious, ask really good questions, and just meet that employer where the opportunity starts, and you will win from that point forward. That's what I would ask people to do. Because here's the deal, man. I want more military in our ranks. I want more ex-military in our industries, in our businesses, because they make businesses better. And then the communities get to experience a better experience because those people are in our businesses. So I guess that's my ask for me. I'll reap the benefit. Someday you're going to do something awesome and you'll need a consultant, and then we get to party together. So,
and Floodlight's a great group to talk to. That's right.
We hope so. We like to think so, for sure.
The second part of that question is one thing that you could offer to others to help them or provide value to them. But I mean, your response to the ask selflessly definitely checks that box, unless you have anything to add.
Sure, I've got something. It's kind of, I might have kind of almost on the surface switched them on you. So if you are an employer or a business owner, let's say you're maybe in the first handful of years of your transition, you're listening to the show. If you run a construction business, some kind of trade business, or specifically a disaster restoration firm, go to floodlightgrp.com/audit and fill out what we call our business health and value assessment. You just do it for yourself. Look, we're not going to spam you to death. I'm not going to chase you down. We will certainly reach out and ask if you'd be interested in reviewing that together. But here's the point. I think it will open your eyes to some things that you can begin focusing on in your business that will actually change the direction your business is going and the kind of experience that you're having. And maybe it might make you a better employer so that you can pull in more ex-military and then carry that synergy on into scaling your business with their help. So anyways, there you go. floodlightgrp.com/audit. It's both for you and for me. How's that?
Perfect.
I appreciate it. Now, I have one follow-up question on that. Are you interested in guiding people who are thinking of starting something like that, or is it really if you're on your way, you're already built, you're trying to grow, is that really where your focus is?
Yeah. And the reality of it is, I mean, let's say in your guys' circle, right? You and I were kind of friends in the industry now. If you guys had like a specific person that was just looking for some communication around that, be happy to do that. But professionally, in terms of scaling our business and where we focus our attention and the kind of consultants that we hire, they are built and bred for helping entrepreneurs take an existing business and begin scaling it and creating growth with the business. So we really are designed to help entrepreneurs that are already in the game, varying stages. But again, if one of you two had a relationship that you felt like, hey, they could really take advantage of a conversation, of course, I'm happy to do that for our community, but not our specialty for sure.
Great. Well, nice. Brandon, this has been fantastic. I've gotten a lot out of this, so I hope that someone out there listening is like, damage restoration, never thought of it. Sounds like I could crush it. Let's check it out. So any final thoughts or advice for someone transitioning or even considering a transition from the military?
Yeah, I think just pointing back to that 6-month program. I don't remember what the name is or what the formal name is, but boy, I mean, if you can leverage that in your favor, you can't help but win. I mean, you just can't help but win.
Yeah, there's a whole host of organizations that actually support that fellowship program, like Hiring Our Heroes. And I've recently put together a list, posted most of it on LinkedIn, that compiles all the organizations that support that, and different, depending on if you want to get into tech or if you wanted to get into medical. There's all different kinds of specialties too that help walk people through that. Resume support, finding their why post military. So there's some fantastic nonprofits. It's completely free to the service member to go through some of these programs. So highly recommend people looking into those.
Yeah, it's so worth it. It's worth every minute of your time.
Well, thanks again, Brandon. This has been awesome. We'll
You
call it a
bet, man.
wrap.
Yeah, appreciate the invite, guys. That was fun.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I didn't catch where you're actually physically located.
We're in Oregon. Yeah, Willamette Valley. So just if you're familiar with Portland, which most people on the planet are familiar with Portland, unfortunately, that's northwest by about 90 minutes. So the rest of Oregon is not Portland. I don't know if you guys have gotten that confused yet either, but here in Oregon, we are definitely frustrated with the confusion. But yeah, we're a much more
Nice. We've visited the Northwest a couple times, and it's absolutely beautiful. We love it up there. We could use a little less rain, but it's kind of a nice respite from the admittedly great weather we get here in
From
Hawaii.
perfection.
Although you're coming at that like primo, like that's the Emerald Valley, like the time of year you're gonna be coming is when all of us Northwesterns are like, see, we told you it was worth it, right? But then it's those 6 months where, like, we question it ourselves. Trust me. We're not.
I'm from Wisconsin, and my roommate in college was from Tampa, Florida, and he always said it's so nice to have a cloudy day sometimes. And I always used to I hated that because I was like, no, the sun is amazing. And now I kind of understand it because it's just nice to have some thunderstorms and stuff like that too. So
everyone needs a break from paradise.
Yeah, I'm into it for about 90 days. And then I'm like, oh, Lord, like, this has got to stop or I'm going to claw my own eyeballs out. But yeah, it's always fun.
Right.
Well, Brandon, we'll let you go here. Thanks again for doing this, man. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, appreciate it, guys.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Veteran Ventures podcast. If you heard something interesting or found the show to be helpful, send it to a friend who is transitioning out of the military or considering a transition. We'd also really appreciate if you left a rating and review of the show. That helps us reach more people with these amazing stories of successful veterans. We'll catch you next time on the Veteran Ventures podcast. And until then, go do the thing. Make that decision, have that conversation, and go find your next mission.